Thank you very much indeed, Professor Thierry Ménard, for your comprehensive analysis and with widespread consequences for also the modern use of rites. Before we go into Q&A, I would now ask Professor Nevia Dolcini from the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies of the University of Macau to respond. As we heard already, she knows the deep roots of Matteo Ricci from Macerata, not from the Marche. And so please, Professor Nevia, to.
So first of all, I would sincerely like to thank you for inviting me to be the commentator to this fantastic talk. Yes, as Dean already anticipated, I am no expert in the field, but I do have very natural bond with the figure of, with the Matteo Ricci, that has been considered like a brilliant man, one of the most interesting men by many important scholars. For example, Joseph Needham would define him as one of the most brilliant men ever. But why I have this natural bond is because of the Matteo Ricci's birthplace, that is Macerata, right? He was born there in 1552. At that time, Macerata was very different from the town that it is today, because it was a very important town at that time, the Papal States that actually enjoyed a lot of autonomy, along with Venice, with respect to other parts of Italy that were under Spain, mainly under Spain. So he could enjoy a very special setting for his education. Yeah. So me studying at the University of Macerata and also working for a while in that place, I had the opportunity to meet scholars that have been worked extensively on Matteo Ricci. One is Professor Filippo Mignini. Yes, Filippo Mignini was my former professor of history and of philosophy. And already in the late 90s, I could actually witness his work on his research project on the translations from Italian to Chinese and from Chinese to Italian, not just of the works of Padre Matteo Ricci, but also of the literati, his friends. And on that occasion, it would call over many PhD students from China. So I enjoyed the company of fond memories of those times and of my Chinese friends in a time in which there were very few Chinese students in Italy. Then we have mentioned Quadlibet, right? The publisher. Well, the founders and co-founders and editors at Quadlibet are my close friends. And even I have to say, among my friends in Macerata, there are the descendants of Padre Matteo Ricci. So I had a lot of occasions, to get familiar with this figure. And more recently, like since 10 years, my spiritual mentor, I would define it that way, Father Gianni Criveller. Anytime he would conclude the work on Padre Matteo Ricci, would send it over to me. And so that's my readings on Father Matteo Ricci. Yeah, this was my journey, my academic journey, that gave me the unique opportunity to become familiar and appreciate Matteo Ricci's lives and works. So I'm very happy that today we are discussing, along with the history of the Chinese rites controversy, also this very important figure, this inclusion of Father Matteo Ricci's approaches and the subsequent condemnation of the rites actually offered a detailed glimpse into a significant chapter of the history of Catholic missions in China. And Ricci actually in his writings points to Alessandro Valignano as the first author of the mission. It was very generous, right, in pointing at Valignano as the author of the mission. But actually, Valignano, although he was the founder of this enterprise, he never set a foot in China. He just stopped in Macau. And we can universally recognize Matteo Ricci as he was the closest collaborator, of course, of Valignano, but the founder of the Chinese mission is definitely Matteo Ricci. And the Christian communities founded thanks to him and by him are actually still in existence, despite difficulties, setbacks, sometimes even persecutions. So Ricci's enterprise has the goal to ascend to Beijing, and he completed it successfully, this mission, also with the help of friendship and the respect of the scholarly class, with also the political and material support of many officials. But it was also full with challenges. He faced xenophobia, he faced resistance, he faced opposition. So I think we should welcome reflections such as this ones, because it would be important to understand what made it so challenging for Matteo Ricci, and then later, as it happens, during the the term controversies and the rights controversies, to see how, more positively interpret the present and perhaps affect the future with our choices. I think Professor Maynard's work illuminates many aspects of Ricci's life and mission, aspects that have been even previously misunderstood, sometimes misunderstood. His presentation effectively addresses common misconceptions about Ricci's role in the interreligious dialogue and even in the right controversies. You have clarified of Ricci's non-involvement in the rights controversy. And you also have carefully analyzed Ricci's method. That it is important to note that the Chinese rights controversy did not erupt during Matteo Ricci's lifetime, because he was not involved directly in the controversy. But I think that your analysis also of Ricci's approach to the rights is essential for providing a more precise characterization of his role in the foundation of the Catholic Church in China. So you have brilliantly highlighted the flexible strategy in Ricci's missions work, which was sensitive to the cultural context. So my suggestion here is maybe it would be interesting to further discuss Ricci's motivations. Of course, there was this goal that was set up and agreed upon also with Valignano to ascend to Beijing. So there was a very clear goal and a clear mission. But were they purely tactical, these goals, purely tactical for the spread of Christianity? Or perhaps they also stem from a very genuine appreciation of Confucian values. So this was my reflection as I was listening to your talk. I think this is one of the points that has been discussed by modern scholars, sometimes misinterpreted. Arguably is a strategy that the hermeneutical principle is a accommodation policy, is a strategy, although flexible, remained true to Christian doctrine. I think this is a nuance that is crucial to be understood. Professor Maynard highlighted that this strategy was actually slowly built upon a growing, genuine respect for the Confucian literates. And I wonder whether part of this motivation and maybe part of what made Ricci's mission a successful one was also due to the specific education that he received at the Roman College in particular. So this is something that I would like to, so these ideas that I have matured while listening to your talk, I would like to share with you, so maybe you can give me your feedback on that. Because of course, one of the most interesting aspects of Ricci's mission in China is the great respect that he paid to Confucian literati, but also the respect that he had from them. He was very much respected. There was this reciprocal respect that actually seemed to be grounded on friendship, on genuine friendship. The education of Matteo Ricci, well, it started in Macerata, but he left Macerata when he was 16. So probably during the time of his education in Macerata, at least we know from Sabatino de Ursis that in the Jesuit school of Macerata, he already was, distinguishing himself as one of the best students, and he already displayed a kind of religious attitude. But we only see that probably the most important part of his education was the one that started in Rome when he joined the Jesuits, and he was studied at the Roman College, which is now La Gregoriana, the Gregorian University. And at that university, the specificity of the curriculum at the Roman College was this mixture of philosophy, theology, but also sciences. Mathematics was considered to be the foundation of philosophy and of theology. And astrology, that was the name that was used at that time. We now call it astronomy, but astrology at that time was the term for astronomy was considered like the highest part. If mathematics was the foundation, astrology, or we can say nowadays astronomy, was the highest aspect of this scientific part of the study. The head of the mathematicians at the Roman College was Clavius. So no wonder that mathematics was at the bottom of their education, and astronomy was the pitch of the education. So theology, philosophy, and scientific studies were not considered to be opposed to each other, were considered to be part of a whole that manifested itself into science and into spiritual vocation and humanities. So I think that Matteo Ricci, probably because of this specific education that he received, would of course be in China as both a scientist and a missionary. Not just because this is important, because this accommodation policy has been then attacked, right, by others. And the modern scholars would consider the approach of missionaries such as Matteo Ricci at that time as a sort of a cheating, would consider Matteo Ricci as a missionary in disguise, like pretending to be a scientist while indeed being a missionary. But if we look back at this education, probably this was just a way in which he was, tailored by his studies during his time at the Roman College. So that is my first intuition that I would like to assess with you. And then I think there are so many other important aspects to consider. So your exploration of these pivotal events opens up several avenues for discussions, not just on Matteo Ricci, but on a more like a wider questions on cultural integration, on religious tolerance, and even on the evolution of a missionary work, even for the future. So maybe I can identify just three theme threads or points that you may want, depending on the time, you may want to discuss or leave it for another occasion. So the first point concerns Longobardo's critique and its implications, the transition from Ricci's interpretation and attitude, his accommodation policy that was actually agreed upon with Valignano. Valignano would call it a modo soave. Then changed with Longobardo. Longobardo's criticism probably showcases a shift in the Jesuit perspective. So Longobardo's approach, as described, is more rigid and skeptical of the syncretism between Confucianism and Christianity. But how did this shift actually affect the Jesuit mission in China beyond the controversy? Did it alter their evangelic strategy in other Asian contexts? The second point regards the theological and anthropological dimensions of the debate that you have excellently captured in your talk. The discussion on orthopraxy and orthodoxy in Confucianism and in Catholicism I found to be particularly engaging. It seems to me it leads to a broader question that is, how can modern Christian missions incorporate cultural practices without compromising core theological principles? Probably is a big problem. Yes, and the third point is an invitation to reflect on the consequences of the condemnation of the rites and its impact on Christianity in China. It would be interesting if we have time to delve deeper into the long-term effects on interreligious dialogue and cultural assimilation. Also, so how has this historical event shaped the Church's approach to other indigenous practices worldwide? I want just to conclude with the idea that I've been forming while reading, for example, Gianni Scriveler's works. He actually, it was kind of convincing, at least for me, that perhaps Matteo Ricci should not be regarded as the precursor of interreligious dialogue, as although he would have this very open and flexible attitude towards the Confucian rites, he would actually be very critical with Taoism, with Buddhism, with other religions. So while I find that these ideas, these arguments from Gianni Scriveler quite convincing, it's also very puzzling to me, and probably this takes me back to the core aspect that we are discussing today, that is the specific openness and the specific modo soave or accommodation attitude that he had towards Confucian practices specifically, but not with other religions and other practices from other religions. But I talked too much. Probably I raised many points, but you can select the one that you find more apt to be discussed here. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Professor Dolcini, to have a wide range of critical points we can discuss also with whole public. I would like, of course, you all to challenge the speakers, especially Professor Menar, with questions. But first, maybe you want to react to few of these 3 points also raised by Professor Dolcini. Please.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you very much, Professor Dolcini. I think you have read a lot on Ricci. You have been really influenced and through your education for so many teachers you have in Maceratas. I think it has a deep impression on you. So I think about the question about education of Ricci at the Roman College, I think it is very important because on the question of the rights, because Ricci, in fact, study humanities and study philosophy, and so that it was very much influenced by a conception of the humanities, which is shaped by rituals, especially the idea of what we find in Cicero, and the idea of the rites, the rituals as expression of the gentleman, of the good behavior, of the honesty of the heart. So all the very humanistic value. And I think it was already there in the education that he get from the humanities. And so it's because of that he can recognize that Confucius could be an equivalent to this kind of humanistic, that it can be like another Cicero or Virgil or Homer, because that it is expression of the most refined expression of civilization, of proper behavior between human beings. So I think he has the idea that Confucius is at that level of this deep level, I should say, of humanities. It's not purely external behavior to be to conform ourselves to this kind of external politeness, but it's something much more deeper, I think, and that allow him to recognize in the ritual of Confucianism something equivalent. And so I think it is very important is education. About the question of Longobardo, yes, you mentioned that, of course, it was kind of a rigid approach. I think that probably we are dealing with, of course, a question of culture, but also with personalities. And probably the personality of Longobardo was more a very anxious man. And so, but which is also to have been placed into the culture at that time, because they were afraid if you deliver sacrament, if you do something which is wrong, well, you are going to be in big trouble. I mean, so they are very, very careful, because they say that it is not only the question of salvation of the other, it is a question, the possibility himself of being condemned to the hell, or that if you do things wrong. And so I think Longobardo was very, with a lot of scruples, and he was a very scrupulous man, and he was afraid of making, and so while perhaps Matteo Ricci was more perhaps optimistic about the possibility of the salvation of the other, Longobardo was careful and didn't want to break any rules, all of that. And so for him, I mean, after many readings, after many years, because in fact, Matteo Ricci died in 1610, but means the Jardin Conference is only 15 years after that he expressed his opposition through writings, even though already when he became superior of the mission, perhaps he started to change things in the practice of the mission. But so I think that Longobardo, yes, he was perhaps more rigid psychologically, And but what was the influence of Longobardo, I think, was again to raise the level of anxiety among all the missionaries, because we had this conference, this dispute in Jiading. It was very tense, because they were fighting each other, and even one of them could not stand it. And what we read, I mean, from the different reports, that we think one of them, in fact, took his life, and took his life because he could not accept that the conclusion of and all of that. So it was very, very tense discussion. And so I think it had even though is why, I mean, because of course it is a religious congregation, so you have the role of the superior to make a final decision. So the decision was made by Palmero, who was at that time the visitor for Japan and China. But this decision, of course, could appease a bit the people, but what could not solve all the question. And so when the Franciscan and the Dominican came into the Fujian province, again, I mean, all the debates started again. And of course, I mean, we have no time to discuss about it, but of course, the role of Caballero and Santa Maria de Caballero as a Franciscan was very important into this, and after Navarrete, all of that. So, but another question about how the modern mission can incorporate cultural elements without compromising. And it's, I think, yes, there is no, I should say, I think at the time of Ricci, probably, and the other missionaries, I mean, the sacraments were so important. And so that they could not think but to say that to put the sacrament of the church in parallel with other rituals could not be accepted. And so it's why only two solutions. Either you say that the Chinese rites are not sacramental, they are not, and so that we are only cultural, only societal, so that you can embrace them. If not, if you say that they have something like a religion, you are necessarily you are going to say they are superstitious, is idolatry. It is religion, but it is a religion which is addressed not to the real God, but to the idol. And so you need to reject them. So I think it is only because of today we have this theology, and that we can go to perhaps a deeper understanding of the Chinese rites, and going to go beyond the Matteo Ricci, because Matteo Ricci only sees the rites as only cultural. And so we are today we agree on the Dominican and Franciscan to say that they are religious, but not to condemn them, but on the contrary, to understand the religious dimension. And so I think that will be my elements of response.